Welcome to Concept Craft. We are presenting step-by-step videos training to crack your certification exam, so you can gain the confidence to take on any accounting challenge. Now let's begin our today's lesson. Creating and using bank rules in QuickBooks Online. Learning outcomes. In this lesson, we'll cover creating and using bank rules in QuickBooks Online. Topics. How do bank rules work? Specify which accounts the transactions will be in. Defining what actions QuickBooks Online should take. Using the auto-add feature. Saving the rule. How QuickBooks Online applies rules. Reviewing transactions with rules. Using rules compared to using recurring transactions. As you'll know, clients periodically need to review transactions in their bank feeds and decide how to categorize them, and whether to add them to their books. Bank rules can help your clients speed up the matching process by identifying transactions that meet specified conditions and suggesting a match, or even automatically adding the transactions to the client's books. The most recent version of the QuickBooks Online Training and Certification exam covers how clients can create and use bank rules. In this lesson, we'll share the new training on bank rules. How do bank rules work? Rules have two elements: conditions and actions. Conditions define which transactions to look for in the bank feeds, and can include criteria such as a keyword in the description or a transaction amount. Actions tell QuickBooks Online what to do with transactions that meet the rule conditions. Examples of these instructions include automatically posting a transaction to the correct accounts and/or assigning pre-specified data such as payee, category, class, location, and/or tags. The first thing you need to do is specify which accounts the transactions will be in. We'll look at this next. Specify which accounts the transactions will be in. To create a new rule, open the Banking Center and select the Rules tab. Then select New Rule. Give the rule a name, then tell QuickBooks Online which accounts the transactions will be in. From the first drop-down, choose whether the rule will apply to money in or money out transactions, then select which bank or credit card accounts the transactions will appear in. You can now define the rule conditions. Define the rule conditions. Defining the rule conditions involves specifying the criteria that transactions need to meet for the rule to apply. You'll need to tell QuickBooks Online what attributes the transactions must have. Select each heading to find out how to set the rule conditions. Decide what criterion to use. First, you need to choose whether the rules should match transactions based on a specified description, bank text, amount. What's the difference between bank text and description? Bank text, also known as bank detail, is the transaction detail that QuickBooks Online receives from the bank. Depending on the bank, this may include information such as the store number, city, state, phone number, and date. It might also include hard-to-interpret abbreviations of vendor/customer names. To see these details, expand your bank transaction in the bank feed. Description is QuickBooks Online's shortened and cleaned-up interpretation of the bank text. Note, it's usually better to create a rule with conditions that reference the bank text rather than the description. What happens if you tell the rule to match transactions by description or bank text? By selecting description or bank text, you get the following options. Contains, doesn't contain, is exactly. Selecting contains as part of a rule permits many kinds of transactions to be assigned to one set of actions. For example, transactions made at different outlets of a national gas station or department store chain can be listed with many different descriptions, such as the store number or city name. However, the transactions will usually all contain the name of the national chain itself. In this case, a client can select Contains and enter just the name of the chain, not the store number or city name. QuickBooks Online will then pick up each relevant transaction. The client would need to make sure that the name they choose is unique to that particular chain, and not one that's also contained in other vendor names. Selecting Doesn't Contain allows clients to filter out specific transactions, so QuickBooks Online excludes them when it applies the rule. In the gas station example above, this could be used to tell QuickBooks Online to ignore transactions from one or more specific gas stations. Clients would use the Is Exactly option to create a condition for an exact match. Using the same gas station example, this option would let the client set up the rule to look only for transactions made at a specific location. Once clients have chosen from this dropdown, they enter the relevant text or reference number in the right-hand field. In the example here, the rule is being set up to look only for transactions with the word transportation in the bank text. What happens if you tell the rule to match transactions by amount? If clients select amount instead of description or bank text, they can set up the rule to look for transactions of a specific amount. With this option, they can choose whether the rule should apply in the ways shown here. Choose the applicable option, then enter the relevant value in the right-hand field. Can you add more than one condition to a rule? Yes, clients can have as many as 5 conditions in a single rule. To add more conditions to the rule, select plus add a condition. This allows clients to set up a second condition using the same options as before. Clients can specify whether the bank activity has to meet any or all of the specified conditions before QuickBooks Online applies the rule. How do you know that the rule is identifying the correct transactions? Once clients have specified which transactions QuickBooks Online should look for, they can select Test Rule to ensure it works. If the rule is working as intended, they'll get a message like the one here. Once clients have defined the rule conditions, they can then define what actions the rule should take with transactions that meet them. We'll cover this next. Defining what actions QuickBooks Online should take. Once clients have specified which transactions QuickBooks Online should look for, they can define what actions it should take with transactions that meet the specified conditions. They can also specify whether the rules should assign or exclude transactions from these actions. Select each heading to see the differences between assign and exclude. What happens if you choose assign? What happens if you choose exclude? What happens if you choose assign? By choosing assign, clients can instruct the rule to assign matching transactions as follows. Transaction type. The options here depend on whether the rule applies to money out or money in. If the rule applies to money out transactions, the options are expense, transfer, check, credit card payment. For money in transactions, the options are deposit, credit card payment, transfer, category. Here, clients select the account on the chart of accounts to categorize this transaction to. If there's more than one account, select add a split to split by percentage or amount. Payee optional but recommended. Again, the options here depend on whether the rule applies to money out or money in transactions. For money out transactions, use the Payee drop-down to select a vendor. Clients can also select a customer here, to record a project-related expense, for example. If the rule applies to money in transactions, use the Payee drop-down to specify a customer. In the example above, you can see that tags is also an option. Clients can also categorize matching transactions by any of the following advanced categorization methods, if they're using them. Tags, classes, locations. Clients can also create a method that will be added to matching transactions. To do this, select plus assign more to reveal additional fields, including a replace bank memo one. What happens if you choose exclude? It's unlikely that a client will encounter a situation where they need to set up a rule to exclude transactions, but it's a useful feature to know about. One example would be a client with a bank or credit card account that mistakenly downloads pending transactions that A. don't affect the balance and B. will be removed after a short time. In this case, choosing exclude instructs QuickBooks Online to send this transaction from the bank feed to the excluded tab in the banking screen. Using the auto add feature. Clients can also create bank rules that categorize transactions and automatically accept them into the client's books in the banking center. Do this by moving the auto add slider to on, as shown here. However, this auto add feature should be used with caution, and only by users with experience of working with bank rules. If your clients decide to use auto add in their rules, they should consider adding a condition regarding the expected dollar amount. That way, if the transaction value exceeds the typical dollar amount, QuickBooks Online won't apply the rule, and the transaction will show up in the For Review tab. Note that if the auto add feature is used, there's no need to review the transactions because the rule will be applied automatically. Transactions that are automatically added appear in the Categorize tab of the bank feed. Saving the rule. When you or your clients have finished setting up a new bank rule, select Save. The rule is added to the rules list in the Banking Center, as shown below. From the Actions column, you or your clients can edit, copy, disable/enable, or delete existing rules in this list. Is the order in which rules appear in the rules list important? Yes, it is. When QuickBooks Online checks transactions from the bank feed, it applies rules in numerical order as listed. We'll explore this next. How QuickBooks Online applies rules. Rules apply only to unaccepted transactions, those in the For Review tab on the banking screen. Select the headers to see how QuickBooks Online seeks to categorize transactions in the For Review tab. Step 1. Is there a match? Step 2. Do any bank rules apply? Step 1. Is there a match? First, QuickBooks Online looks to see if the transaction is already recorded. If so, it suggests a match. This process is explained in the lesson on managing transactions in the bank feed. If QuickBooks Online doesn't find a match, it checks whether the transaction meets the conditions for any bank rules. Step 2. Do any bank rules apply? If QuickBooks Online doesn't find a match, it runs each transaction through the list of rules in the rules list to determine if any are applicable. It only applies one rule per bank activity, and it uses the following logic when determining which rule to apply. Rules are applied in numerical order as listed in the rules list. The first rule that fits a bank activity, that is, where the transaction meets those rule conditions, is the one that QuickBooks Online applies. To change the order in which rules are applied, use the grip icons to drag them up or down. What if the transaction meets the conditions of a bank rule? If the auto-add feature was turned on when the rule was created, QuickBooks Online will automatically apply the rule, create the transaction, and move it to the Categorize tab, as you saw earlier. If auto-add isn't turned on, the transaction will be flagged with a rule label in the For Review tab. You or the client can then decide whether to tell QuickBooks Online to execute the rule actions. What if the transaction doesn't meet any rule conditions? If QuickBooks Online runs a transaction through each rule and still doesn't know how to categorize a transaction, it'll try to give it a category based on past transactions or the customer/vendor name. These transactions will be labeled as an uncategorized income/expense/asset, as appropriate. Reviewing transactions with rules. Unless your client has turned the auto-add feature on, they'll need to review the transactions that QuickBooks Online applied a bank rule to. The client can then instruct QuickBooks Online to carry out the specified actions for that rule, for example, categorize and/or reclassify the transaction. To do this, open the For Review tab in the Banking Center and select Recognize from the All Transactions drop-down. This lists all transactions recognized by a bank rule and or that match an existing transaction in QuickBooks Online. Transactions recognized by a rule are marked with a rule label, as you can see here. If everything looks good, select Add in the Action column to move the transactions directly into an account in QuickBooks Online. Clients can also select and review each transaction before they move it. Using rules compared to using recurring transactions. Rules have some things in common with recurring transactions in QuickBooks Online, as you can discover in the lesson on creating and using recurring transactions. As a result, there are many situations when clients can use either feature to achieve their needs. When would it be better to use a bank rule? It's usually better to use a bank rule to enter routine expenses like phone or utility bills. This is because rules take variations in dollar amount and date into account, which is easier than fixing amounts and dates on scheduled recurring transactions, or checking for and editing reminder transactions. When would a recurring transaction be more appropriate? Bank rules can't be used on products and services. So if clients have item-based transactions, they'll need to use recurring transactions. Here are a couple more situations where it would be better to use recurring transactions than banking rules. A client wants to create reminders to invoice a customer regularly but for varying products/services/amounts/descriptions. In this case, the client can also set up a recurring invoice to include any unbilled charges to the customer. This is a feature that bank rules don't offer. Note, if the products/services/amounts/descriptions won't vary, use a scheduled recurring transaction instead. A client wants to process non-item-based transactions that vary in amount and date. Note, if products/services are not being used, and there will be any variation in dollar amount, such as a phone bill, which will vary if extra charges or rate changes happen, the client should use a rule. How do you know when it would be best to use a bank rule or a recurring transaction? The decision to set up a bank rule or a recurring transaction depends on whether the transactions will have the same details each time and or occur at the same intervals. Here's a quick overview. Transaction attributes. Bank rule or recurring transaction? Same transaction details, products/services/amounts/descriptions, on the same date. Recurring transaction, scheduled. Same transaction details, products/services/amounts/descriptions, on varying dates. Recurring transaction, unscheduled. Varying transaction details, amounts/descriptions, on the same date. Bank rule. Varying transaction details, amounts/descriptions, on varying dates. Bank rule. Summing up. Learning outcomes. Well done. In this lesson, we covered creating and using bank rules in QuickBooks Online. Knowledge recap. Bank rules help your client to speed up the task of reviewing and categorizing transactions in bank feeds. Now you can help your clients create and use bank rules effectively, including using features such as auto-add. Next steps. In the next lesson, we'll explore basic report types and how to add custom fields to forms.